Good evening, everyone. My name is Norma Nelson. Congratulations to all of you who have recognized the importance of the role of sheriffs in California counties. I am delighted to welcome you to today's launch of the California Coalition for Sheriff Oversight and our presentation on sheriff oversight in California, balancing power with responsibility. The coalition comprises grassroots organizers working on sheriff oversight in California and is open to others with that shared interest. It's an honor for me to represent the League of Women Voters of California, as well as my local league in Sacramento. The League of Women Voters of California is a nonpartisan grassroots organization working to protect and expand voting rights, build grassroots power in our communities, drive policy, and change on the biggest challenges facing our state, and ensure that everyone is represented in our democracy. Sheriff departments lacking accountability and transparency has resulted in an alarming number of in-custody jail deaths, jails that act as de facto mental health institutions, among other related issues, and are big challenges in California. The League of Women Voters of California adopted the criminal justice position in 2018, and it was adopted at the national level the following year. I'm on the board of directors for the League of Women Voters of Sacramento County and established its criminal justice committee in 2018. AB 1185 is one of two criminal justice reform laws supported by the League that is directly tied to Sacramento City and County to address systemic injustices that apply throughout the state. The other law enforcement use of deadly force, AB 392. Our speakers today will elaborate on AB 1185, which grants California boards of supervisors and alternative local county members of the public the authority to establish oversight boards. The power of county sheriffs over the lives of Californians is enormous. Alameda, Los Angeles, and Sacramento counties host the deadliest mega jails in California. So one might wonder why San Francisco isn't included in that number, but we have a speaker who will talk about that later. Out of 58 counties, over 50 counties contract with a for-profit company called WellPath to provide jail medical care. San Francisco provides its own health care, and like I said, someone will be talking about that later. But of course, smaller counties are also impacted by issues, sheriff-related issues. As a member of the state's League's Criminal Justice Committee, we thought it was important to follow up on criminal justice reform laws that we supported to see if those laws were actually being implemented at the local level. To do so, we collaborate with existing efforts, or in the case of sheriff oversight, we established our own sheriff oversight working group in 2022. We aim to identify best practices in sheriff oversight and to work with other organizations that are addressing accountability and transparencies. We also support, and more importantly, we support local leagues in this arena as well. The coalition is a key partner to the League of Women Voters of California's Sheriff Oversight Working Group, in which I chair with Veronica Jones. Such collaboration provides an opportunity to share experiences, challenges, wins, and lessons from each other and to build upon a shared database. We are in for some great speakers this evening, including none other than the legislative author of AB 1185, California Assembly Member Kevin McCarty. We are fortunate to have him with this forum, as this is his last term in the legislature. We also have panelists with experience in implementing this law. These panelists include Jason Wechter, who is the National Association for Civilian Oversight in Law Enforcement board member. We have John Eldon of Sonoma County, and we have Marshall Armwine with the ACLU of Northern California, with whom I've worked with in Sacramento. It is a pleasure to introduce to you today's facilitator, who is Carl Tenenbaum. He spent over 3 decades as a San Francisco police officer. There, he specialized in community outreach and policing with an emphasis on restorative justice and alternatives to incarceration. Upon retiring from police work, Carl continued his commitment to criminal justice reform and police accountability through his work with the Law Enforcement Action Network, also known as LEAP, and was a candidate for Sonoma County Sheriff in the 2022 election. This led him to his membership with the Community for Law Enforcement Accountability, NOW, which is also the acronym CLEAN. We'll be hearing more about them as a member organization as well. And so they're working with this coalition. So without further ado, I'd like to present to you Carl Tenenbaum. Thank you and welcome.
Carl, you're muted.
It's bound to happen every time. Thank you, Norma. Thank you for introducing me and for introducing the other panelists and speakers today. Did you know that San Francisco is the only city in San Francisco County, making San Francisco County one of the more unique counties in California? I say more, but all of our counties are very unique in the sense of their geography, their population, their economy, and the different social issues that apply to every one of those counties, whether it's size, politics, whatever it is. The one thing that all 58 of those counties have in common is that they are under the criminal justice authority of elected sheriffs. Elected sheriffs are constitutionally mandated by the California state constitution. Those sheriffs in the 58 different counties, they provide patrol services in unincorporated areas. They run the jails. They're usually the coroner, and they're also courtroom bailiffs. In 2023, California counties combined paid well over $100 million to settle liability cases for excessive force, racism, wrongful death, and civil rights violations committed by sheriff's office personnel. Because there is no uniform statewide system for monitoring sheriff's offices to ensure professional conduct, many sheriffs resist the idea of oversight. The rationale for many sheriffs resisting oversight is they are capable of policing themselves. However, based on those monetary settlements, the wrongful deaths, I think it begs the question, if the sheriffs can't police the community properly, how are they going to police themselves? In response to repeated instances of excessive force and deaths and the financial strain on our counties, many individuals, politicians, community groups, and organizers have been working collaboratively to bring strong, independent oversight to California sheriff's offices. Truly effective oversight will ensure transparency and accountability from our elected sheriffs. Tonight, as we officially launch the California Coalition for Sheriff Oversight, we will hear from 4 individuals with extensive backgrounds in policing and politics and in legislation who explain how independent oversight functions, how to get it implemented in your county, and steps to ensure its success. The format of the webinar will be as follows. This webinar is being recorded. Questions can be asked from participants and from viewers through the Q&A feature. The chat feature has been disabled. After each presentation of each panelist, we will have questions Q&A. Some are preloaded, and we will take some from the Q&A feature. At the end of the presentations, we will have a 2-minute update from our coalition counties. And at the end, time permitting, we will have more Q&A for the panelists who remain here. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker for the evening, California Assembly member from the 6th District, Kevin McCarty. Assembly member McCarty represents the 6th Assembly District, including the majority of the city of Sacramento and parts of unincorporated Sacramento County. Assembly member McCarty is the chair of the Public Safety Committee and also sits on the Select Committee on Police Reform, both of which are key committees to ensuring fair, professional, and just conduct by California law enforcement. Assemblymember McCarty has authored over 75 measures that became law, including AB 1185, which allows counties to create independent oversight of their sheriffs, and the reason that we're here tonight and the reason that this coalition is growing. Additional landmark legislation called for providing universal preschool, restoring voting rights for the formerly incarcerated, and ensuring independent investigations for police shootings. Assemblymember McCarty attended American River Community College and earned degrees from CSU Long Beach and CSU Sacramento. Assemblymember McCarty and his wife live in Sacramento with their twin daughters, Victoria and Barbara. I'm sorry, I keep referring to him as Senator McCarty. Assemblymember McCarty, I would like to welcome you to tonight's webinar.
Hi, I'm his staffer. He should be here any minute. So just hold tight. Appreciate your patience. Sorry, he tends to run a little late. It's a busy man. So I will check in on him.
Thank you, Delaney. We just appreciate that he has made the time for us. We will be recording this. We are recording it, and we will send the recording out to everyone who attended or signed up. And also, we will be doing Q&A and sending out a copy of the presentation slide deck that you see. So you'll get all that afterwards.
And also the Q&A feature, if you have questions, just type them into the Q&A box and we will be going through them. Based on the number of attendees that have signed up for this evening, I have no doubt there will be multiple questions of the same general nature, and then we'll be able to decide who to address those questions, either one or all of the panelists, to get the answers.
And I believe the member is here now.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Assemblymember McCarty, welcome to tonight's webinar, and thank you for coming.
Yes.
Well, we've done your introduction, so if you're ready to go, we're ready to hear what you have to tell us. We would like to know about 1185, AB 1185, and what you've done to further the issue of criminal justice reform.
Yeah. So I think this is under the lens of police accountability and oversight. You know, certainly in the last decade or so, California has done a lot of work to making, you know, police records of officers who crossed the line available to the public. You know, done a lot of work on de-escalation and use of force standards to bring about, you know, less fatalities and more, I think, community-based policing. And just, you know, general oversight and accountability of taxpayer-funded police departments. And this issue that I've been focusing on for oversight from the sheriff's department was kind of really, you know, ripped from the headlines, if you will, from two counties that were here in Sacramento, excuse me, that had some really, you know, how I describe, I'll just be straight out, kind of not necessarily rogue sheriffs, but like sheriffs who just, you know, weren't playing well in the sandbox, you could say at the minimum, potentially much worse, who were just ignoring their sheriff oversight. And these were counties that were paying massive amounts of public dollars for police elements. And that's kind of the big issue that I've always had, is that this isn't just about holding officers accountable that cross a line, because let's face it, the majority of officers don't cross a line, but when officers do, one, there should be swift accountability, and two, you know, it's bad for all the officers who do play by the rules, or people who don't follow that. But more importantly, the tens of millions of dollars that we pay out in taxpayer funded settlements is key. Just today at the Capitol, we were passed a bill that makes these settlements readily available to the public once a year on, you know, police and sheriff's department's website, because it shouldn't take a public records request or, you know, an entrepreneurial local reporter to report as far as how much cities and jurisdictions are paying out in these settlements. So, you know, we came up with this idea that these sheriff oversight bodies, which exist in many counties throughout California, you know, should have structure and should have teeth, and should not be able to be quashed by local sheriffs who don't want people, you know, overseeing their work and making sure that we have some oversight. So there is a sheriff in Los Angeles County who basically, you know, locked the doors and wouldn't let in, you know, the independent sheriff oversight body in LA County that was elected. And then the sheriff oversight body here in Sacramento, which was appointed by the County Board of Supervisors, our sheriff was so against the oversight that he literally changed the lock on the door to not allow the person to go to work. And let me just tell you about the person who had the job as the inspector general for the county of Sacramento. He was our former police chief of the city of Sacramento. His name was Rick Brazil. He wasn't an activist, wasn't a Black Lives Matter activist. Nothing wrong with that anyway. But like, he wasn't like somebody who didn't have law enforcement credentials. This was our former police chief of Sacramento, who was a national expert on use of force standards, and he had the audacity to do his job and to question and to look at basically the practices of the sheriff's department, and specifically review a critical incident that happened here along Highway 50 in Sacramento, where a few sheriff's deputies had a suspect cornered literally on the freeway between walls on each side, and had this individual like pinned in, but still shot across multiple lanes of traffic, and put the public at risk. And our independent sheriff oversight individual, Mr. Brazil, wanted to do some investigations and interview witnesses and departments, and he showed up to work, and literally his badge didn't work anymore, so he couldn't even do his job. So this was kind of the final straw for me, that I authored the bill, which says that if a county wants to have a sheriff oversight body, whether they're appointed by the county board of supervisors or created by a vote of the people, that they should have subpoena power. They should have the ability to do their job without interference from the independently elected sheriff. And the sheriffs would say, "Hey, we have oversight. It's called the election every 4 years." And I'm like, "No, that's how you get elected, but you're also funded by the taxpayers of the people of that county. And if the county wanted to create an oversight body, you shouldn't intervene with the work that they're doing." So, it was a controversial bill. I didn't get it the first time, and it was signed into law, I think 20 or 21. So there was, a series of, I think, smart police reform bills that were languishing in the legislature for many years. And it was after the summer of 2020, the summer of George Floyd, when a lot of these measures finally passed. And then, and I wouldn't say this is anti-law enforcement. This is, pro-taxpayer and pro-oversight, pro-sunshine. And so, we're proud of the results. And the results didn't say that counties must have them. Some counties haven't created them at all. But it says that, again, if a county does create these, it sets kind of some of the rules and standards, and clearly states that the elective sheriff cannot interfere with that independent oversight. So that's kind of a snapshot. I'm not sure that's what you're looking for. If you want more than that, I'll stop here and allow any others to engage with us if they'd like to.
I appreciate it. I think you really covered a lot, including, one of the questions was what was the impetus for you to author this legislation. I think one of the questions that I have that dovetails on my question is, was this bill, basically the bill as written gives counties permission to create oversight.
Correct.
Was
Yep.
there ever legislation to make it mandatory throughout the counties?
We thought about that. I didn't think we'd have the votes for that. I think one of my colleagues had tried to create that over the years. And, this was a tough enough vote, in and of itself. So I wouldn't have the vote to have it in every county. And, we thought there's ample opportunity for either the Board of Supervisors to do this, or the electorate. But let's face it, there's 58 counties in California. I would say 5 or 10 are, 30-50% of the population, right? LA, San Diego, or San Francisco. So these big counties have these oversight bodies. Some of the smaller ones, the rural counties, and Modoc and Alpine, Mariposa, the politics of those communities don't want to have anybody second guessing, law enforcement. So even though this bill is permissive and allows them to be established, we don't think that some of those, counties anytime soon are going to be creating these bodies, but they could. The electorate could rise up. And again, I get to my first point: the amount of money that we pay every year, cities and jurisdictions, for these payouts, especially when we're in an era of budget cuts, and You know, the city of Los Angeles has to do bonds every year through Wall Street to pay off these, they call them, police brutality bonds is the nickname for them. So there's, the more that the public knows how much is paid for these, the more of a demand there is for oversight, accountability, and I think better practices in law enforcement.
I think you just summed it up best by saying the more that the public knows. If we could get
Mhm.
everybody here to spread the word and get this movement going, I think we would have a lot more effect statewide. One of the other questions was having to do with, and you've cited a couple examples, rogue sheriffs. A lot of this is a result of them having the unique position of being law enforcement leaders who are elected. Has there been any
Correct.
discussion about changing the Constitution to where they're not elected, but appointed by either, the mayor or, I'm sorry, the board of supervisors, some different system besides elections?
Yeah, that's been thrown out there a couple times. One thing that I'd like to think about is, think about the sheriff. It goes back to, European times and the noble and lords in England. The sheriff clearly was the top cop. But if you look at a sheriff of a county like Sacramento and Los Angeles, it's more important to have a skilled public administrator who understands budgets, human resources, personnel, than somebody who has the tactics to do stops and use firearms and police practices. I would say that the sheriffs who are really skilled are really good public administrators. And so I think, that's one thing that we thought is, does the sheriff have to be a sworn officer? I don't know. I think, that lends a question too. If you want to adequately and appropriately run sheriff's department, I think having a skilled public administration is just as important as having skills in law enforcement. Whether or not they're elected or not, I don't know if that has the political wherewithal to make it a go. I have heard that proposal in the past, but it's not something that I'm looking at authoring right now.
This question, I don't know. Do you know how many counties have established formal independent oversight of their sheriff's offices?
I don't. If you look, maybe my staff Delaney could pull up the bill and the analysis. I think if you look at 1185 from a couple years ago, it said that number. But I do know that since my bill was crafted, there have been several counties who created their own sheriff oversight boards, and they had me on like a webinar to do just this. I forget which county. I think Marin, maybe a couple others. And we were clear that these can be established either through a vote of the people or via an action by the local county board of supervisors.
Now you've already crafted some very groundbreaking legislation. Do you have anything else that you're working on is in this area of criminal justice reform?
Yeah, I think that some of my big bills I focused on, police accountability, have been on this oversight. This bill, the sheriff oversight bodies, I worked on the bill in 2019 after a high-profile shooting here of an unarmed individual in the back of his grandma's house with his cell phone, Stephon Clark.
Right.
That changing the use of force standards to really focus on de-escalation, having improved police practices to having use of force, certainly as a last resort. And then the other big bill, which I think it was a national story too when I authored, the governor signed it, is having independent investigations for police shootings of unarmed individuals. I think too often there's a conflict of interest when the police themselves, especially when local DAs investigate police shootings in smaller counties. Many times those DAs and the local cops and the police unions are so cozy, and they know each other by their first name, and they're just like, it's super hard for them to be independent when they do these investigations. So it's like having a baseball game and the umpires like a family member of one of the players. It's like people are always going to question the balls and strikes calls. So the bill that I authored now has the state attorney general being the one that does these officer involved shooting investigations. And I would be right to say that there hasn't been an increase in the number of officers found guilty in the standard, but that wasn't my desire. It was that I wanted the community and public to know that the investigation was fair and independent and unbiased. And I think having the independent attorney general do that in his unit has brought about more public trust to that process.
Assemblymember McCarty, I know that your time is very valuable, and I want to thank you for being here tonight to answer these questions. You've really given us a very good background, and I'm honestly, as a law enforcement professional, I'm very impressed with your broad view of what's going on with law enforcement and the steps that you're taking to address those at the legislative level. So again, on behalf of all the attendees here today and the hosts, I want to thank you very much for being here and presenting to us.
Yeah, thank you. And just the last thing, I briefly mentioned this. Just 10 hours ago, we were in the Senate Public Safety Committee, and we had a bill heard that basically ensures that payouts of excessive force for payouts by local jurisdictions, shall be made public by the local body once a year on their website. So I think that's critically important. There's been a lot of research. Forget this professor's name. Maybe Delaney, you can find it and put it in their chat right here. She wrote a groundbreaking book on law enforcement, excessive force. She's a UCLA professor, and her basically conclusion was that the more the public knows about how much is spent on these incidents, and money's not going to fix the local swimming pool. I mean, here in Sacramento, we've had a Southside Park pool that's been, closed down for two summers now. It's 105 degrees here in Sacramento, and just a few weeks ago, the city paid out $3 million on an excessive force incident when an individual wasn't even killed. And so some of these incidents really impact the quality of life in our neighborhoods, and the more people understand as far as how much money is going to these, they'll demand action for jurisdictions to bring about more de-escalation policies and outcomes that I think are fair and sure to the community. So
thank you. And again, it all makes such perfect sense to just address these issues to reduce these bad outcomes that we're seeing from law enforcement.
yeah, and she put it in the chat right there. I would take a look at her book or articles, Professor Schwartz from UCLA.
Yes, Professor Schwartz.
Okay,
An expert. Thank you very much, Assemblyman.
Yes,
members.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you for your questions.
Our next speaker and panelist will be Jason Wechter from the NACOL National Practices. Jason Wechter has been a key member of the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, NACOL, since 2004, drafting and implementing effective training and investigation standards for civilian oversight practitioners. Jason has worked to create independent oversight for both the San Francisco Police Department and the San Francisco Sheriff's Department, respectively, ultimately working at both oversight agencies as an investigator and supervising investigator. Jason has also worked for the Oakland Community Police Review Agency as an investigator for the San Francisco Public Defender's Office and has operated his own investigative agency. Jason received his bachelor's degree from Stony Brook University with a major in anthropology and a minor in journalism. And this is a kicker. In his spare time, Jason creates team-building treasure hunts in the San Francisco Bay Area. So if anybody wants an adventure, by all means, get a hold of Jason. And before I put Jason on, I will just say that Jason's career and oversight in San Francisco overlapped my career almost perfectly. So I've known Jason for over 30 years, and it's a pleasure to reconnect with him tonight. Jason, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. So as Carl has said, I am a member of the NACOL Board of Directors, and I am a member and the former president of the San Francisco Sheriff's Department Oversight Board. I did not work there as an investigator. I only worked at the San Francisco Department of Police Accountability. But I want to say I am not speaking on behalf of or as a representative of either NACOL or the San Francisco Sheriff's Department Oversight Board. What I say is based on my professional knowledge and experience from decades working as an oversight practitioner and an oversight advocate. So I'm going to talk about sheriff oversight generally, especially regarding the role NACOL can play in assisting with it. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about oversight for the San Francisco Sheriff's Department. So as you can surmise, sheriff's oversight is comparatively new outside California. There's a sheriff oversight entity in King County, Washington, the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight of OLEO. It exists in counties in Virginia and Maryland. In California, some of these sheriff's oversight entities predate AB 1185. As the Assembly member mentioned, in Los Angeles has a very well-established Inspector General in Max Huntsman, former federal prosecutor, a very talented and committed individual who's also been very courageous in approaching some very significant obstacles thrown at him. It also has a very well-funded and well-staffed community commission. Its executive director is my NACO colleague, Charmaine Mosley, and I think that is an excellent example. If you're looking, for example, of effective sheriff's oversight, both the IG model and the Border Commission. Orange County has had oversight for well over a decade, originally beginning with Mike Giannacco, currently of the OIR group, who now does the auditing for the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Department, and of course, Sonoma County. We'll be hearing about that in a little while. So since AB 1185 passed, there's been some entities that are in progress. Some have been more successful than others. Sheriff oversight is newer than police oversight, and it presents some different challenges. As Carl mentioned, the sheriff is elected and may feel they answer only to the electorate, whereas a chief of police is appointed, answers to the municipal government, a mayor or city council or city manager. So a sheriff has much more autonomy. Police departments usually operate in cities, which are more homogeneous. Sheriffs operate in counties, which in California may include a rural area and an urban area. And because of that difference, not everyone in the county experiences law enforcement in the same way. And therefore, they may not have the same attitudes about law enforcement or about the need or usefulness for oversight. And I'm sure others will give some examples of that. So while AB 1185 opens the door for oversight, there's been a lack of political will by the boards of supervisors in many counties to establishing it. So what can you do about that? Well, you can educate all the stakeholders about oversight. And this includes not just community members, but elected officials, the sheriff, the deputies union, about the benefits of oversight, what oversight potentially can look like. And doing this education process early on can help address objections that may arise later on when something is on the ballot or before the Board of Supervisors or during the meet and confer process. Many people have a distorted view of what oversight is. They think it's biased. They think they're out to get police, and that is not at all the fact. So NACO can play a very valuable role as a partner in this. It's been in existence for almost 30 years. It is a highly respected organization by both oversight practitioners, people in law enforcement, elected officials, and community members. It has the best existing resources on law enforcement oversight. Among other things, it received a U.S. Department of Justice Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services grant to create some invaluable resources for law enforcement, oversight practitioners, local officials, and community organizations. So I urge you to go to the NACO website. We have a couple of the links there that I think are very valuable. One is a Civilian Oversight 101 webinar that really should just be basic introduction to how it works, and that's free. NACO will also provide, I think typically for free, this 1-hour community education session. It also contracts for NACO for training and technical assistance to counties. We have an outstanding executive director in Cameron McElhaney, who probably knows more about civilian oversight than anyone in the United States.
You are viewing Karina Merrick's screen.
And we have an incredible director of training in Tina, who brings many skills as in academia, social work, and is a wonderful teacher and facilitator. NACO also has many current and former law enforcement officers who are active in it, who can explain to members of a sheriff's department why oversight need not be feared, why it could be an asset for them, and why many things that they may suspect are not not sure that it's someone who has worked in law enforcement. They can say this can work and it will benefit you. The models of civilian oversight on the NACO website describes each of the various models because people often ask which model should we create. And very importantly, the NACO Code of Ethics. It's important that it demonstrates that the oversight profession values objectivity and impartiality, which again addresses some objections that elected officials or law enforcement officers may have. That Code of Ethics has been adopted by many oversight entities around the country. Frequent question is what's needed for effective oversight? And NACO on its website has 13 principles of effective oversight. I'm not going to go over them now. I strongly urge you go and look at them. Each one is described in detail, and these are all the elements you need to make oversight effective. So moving to oversight of the San Francisco Sheriff's Department. As Carl said, San Francisco is unique. It's a city and a county. We have a mayor and a board of supervisors. Because it's a city and county, most patrol functions are performed by the San Francisco Police Department. The San Francisco Sheriff's Office is primarily a custodial agency. It operates the jails. It has some limited patrol duties, provides security for the courts and some other buildings. San Francisco is also unique in that for 30 years, we had Sheriff Michael Hennessy, who did not come from a law enforcement background. He was an attorney who'd worked in prisoners' rights. The law has since been changed to prevent anyone like Michael who does not have a law enforcement background from running for sheriff. So what we have in San Francisco, created by ballot initiative in 2020, is a seven-member Sheriff's Department Oversight Board, 3 appointed by the mayor, 4 by the Board of Supervisors. I'm one of the Board of Supervisors appointees. The charter amendment that established it mandates an inspector general and an office of inspector general that will investigate all complaints against San Francisco Sheriff's Department employees and contractors, deaths in custody. It will recommend discipline when they sustain complaints, and it will monitor the Sheriff's Department operations through audits and investigations. My opinion, and again, I'm speaking solely for my health, is that the oversight entity for the Sheriff's Department is not currently functioning effectively. I don't think it's a good example of effective oversight as we look at current best practices. I think you should look to Los Angeles or Sonoma for how, for a good model, particularly regarding how the oversight entity operates and how its civilian board is composed and operates. The Inspector General began his duties in January. Our charter mandates that he have 1 investigator for every 100 deputies on his staff. The mayor just unveiled a budget that provides funding for no investigators, for no staff other than the Inspector General and the existing secretary for the Oversight Board. I am extremely disturbed by this. I don't see how oversight can work with Inspector General if he doesn't have funding for staff. I just learned of this the other day. So that's our biggest challenge. Another challenge was the mandatory education for the oversight board was done exclusively by the Sheriff's Department. And there was no education for them or for the sheriff or other officials on the role, history, and principles of effective oversight. And I said that education is important early on, letting people know why oversight is important and what elements you need to make it effective and what the best practices are. Unfortunately, this has resulted in some oversight board members expressing some significant hostility towards NACO and towards oversight best practices. For example, the board refused to even allow a vote on adopting the NACO Code of Ethics, which I found very disturbing. The IG recruitment was challenging, although I recommended and other oversight practitioners we spoke to recommended that if you have the funding to hire a professional recruitment firm, we did have that funding. The board chose not to do that. That task fell to the Department of Human Resources. They were unaccustomed to recruiting for those type of positions. I think it took longer than necessary. And because of that, and also because of some requirements imposed, particularly the prohibition on someone having a law enforcement background and 5 years of management experience, I think we had fewer qualified applicants and fewer applicants with experience in the oversight community. Lastly, the challenges the community was that worked to establish the oversight when passage of the ballot initiative did not remain engaged. And partially this is due to logistics. The oversight board meets on the first Friday of every month at City Hall from 2 to 5 p.m. Members of the public have to participate in person, not remotely. So that's really limited who can be there and make their voices heard. And we've had very few community events in the community. I don't think we've had any in the 9 months.
Well, to
So-
repeat what the assembly members said, it sounds like the supervisors have not made it convenient for people to participate. Is that correct, Jason?
I'm told that was largely a function of availability of the meeting room and the availability of SF.gov, which broadcasts meetings live, what fit into their schedule.
Right. So
So
I have several questions lined up for
Sure.
you, and I have people waiting to ask you more. If you can stick around to the end of the webinar,
Sure.
Jason, I would love to. We need to get to
Sure.
my current compatriot John Alden. So that being said, Jason, thank you, and I want to follow up on some of the points that you made to us, and with the Q&A at the end. Our next panelist is John Alden. John Alden is the director of the Independent Office of Law Enforcement Review and Outreach, ILARO, in Sonoma County, where he oversees the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office as an AB 1185 Inspector General. John was previously the executive director of the Community Police Review Agency, CPRA, in the city of Oakland for nearly 3 years, the San Francisco Department of Police Accountability, and also for the Internal Affairs Division of the San Francisco Police Department. John has served as the managing attorney of the Independent Investigations Bureau in the San Francisco District Attorney's Office, a unit specializing in the investigation and prosecution of officer-involved shootings, in-custody deaths, and other forms of potentially criminal officer misconduct. John began his career as a prosecutor, working in Sonoma and Marin counties, and then transitioned to private practice litigating employment law matters. Early in his career, he worked in the California State Legislature as an Unruh Fellow. Mr. Alden received both his law degree and bachelor's degree from the University of California. John, it's a pleasure for me to introduce you.
Thank you, Carl. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Folks, I've been asked to talk a little bit about the model we have in Sonoma County for sheriff oversight. So I'll cover that briefly, and then I know we have some other speakers and time for questions. So let me give you a brief history of our office. Our office, ILARO, has a fairly challenging name. And that is in part because in the early stages of our creation, we were one of the first such agencies in the state. And I think there was a lot of debate about what to call an agency like ours. We started back in, well, in a way, in late 2013. There was a young teen, Andy Lopez, who lived here in Sonoma County, who was shot and killed by sheriff's deputies in an unincorporated area just outside of Santa Rosa in the center of the county. And the death of Andy Lopez sparked a tremendous level of protest and upset in the community. And it really unearthed that there were many people in the county of Sonoma who did not feel confident in the services of the sheriff, did not feel that they had the relationship they wanted to have with the sheriff's office. And that finally came out really in a very public, very visceral way. So the pain and the angst of this young man's death ended up pushing the Board of Supervisors to say, well, we should have the community tell us what oversight would look like here in Sonoma County. So our Board of Supervisors put together a group called the Kaye Task Force that had members of a wide variety of kinds of backgrounds from here in the county, including folks from the sheriff's office, to discuss and put together an idea about what oversight would look like in Sonoma County for the sheriff. And because of some of the issues that have been mentioned by previous speakers, the independence of sheriffs, the very limited oversight powers that anybody else in the county really has over sheriffs, that was a challenging job. And so part of the recommendation of the CAE task force was to create an office like an inspector general, which they called ILRO, which the Board of Supervisors later decided to call ILRO, and also a commission or a board, which here we call the Community Advisory Council. And between those two groups, ILRO was going to have professional staff doing audits of the work of the Internal Affairs Division at the Sheriff's Office, because the community had identified that a significant concern was whether or not alleged misconduct of sheriff's deputies were really investigated appropriately. So that's one of our core pieces of work under this proposal from the CAE task force. And then in addition to that, our staff make recommendations to the sheriff's office about policy improvements. We also are able to look at issues in the jail, and including whether there are internal affairs investigations that were done completely and correctly in the jail, and whether any of the particular policies or practices in the jail can or should be improved. Meanwhile, the Community Advisory Council is there to create a relationship between the sheriff's office and those in the community that might not otherwise feel they have a relationship with the sheriff's office, in order to provide feedback from community to law enforcement about how community wants to be served by law enforcement. So the Board of Supervisors implemented this plan in 2015. Our offices really got going in 2016. And almost immediately, there was tremendous conflict between ILRO and the CAC, and also the Sheriff's Office. Over those first 3 or 4 years, there were some substantial successes. ILRO started issuing annual reports that describe both the audits of those Internal Affairs Division cases in a sanitized, anonymized way as required by state law, and also descriptions of some of the policy recommendations that ILRO had made. But on the other hand, there were challenges regarding access and authority. There were some debates about whether or not the county voters as a whole really supported the idea of ILRO. There were some, I think, who did not like the idea of having oversight over the sheriff's office, who called for the elimination of ILRO during that period of time. So a group of folks in the community put together a ballot measure, which was they were hoping would be on the ballot in 2020. And of course, as you may recall, in early 2020, COVID hit, and that happened just as the folks who were trying to gather signatures to get this measure on the ballot would have been trying to gather signatures, and obviously could not because of the pandemic. And then, as we'll all recall, there was another tragedy in 2020, right? The murder of George Floyd. And so between those two factors, the community groups who were putting together this coalition around improving the powers of ILRO through a ballot measure went to the Board of Supervisors and asked them to put it on the ballot. And that was before my time here, but that was from everything you can see from, say, like watching the public meetings about that, or watching some of the media about that issue. It was very intense. There were a number of people, including in some of the local law enforcement unions, who were very much opposed to the idea of such a ballot measure. And there were a lot of people in community who were pushing the Board of Supervisors pretty hard about that issue. And the board, to their credit, I think saw that it was not only a good idea, but there was tremendous public support for such a measure. They put it on the ballot in 2020 with a few modifications as compared to the version that community had brought forward. And it passed with about 2/3 of the vote in the November of 2020. And I think one of the things that was great for oversight in that victory was that it made it very clear that the population of Sonoma County strongly supported independent oversight for the sheriff's office. The question of whether the public really supports oversight has never come up again in the 4 years since the ballot measure passed with such an overwhelming vote. So I think those two factors, these two tragedies that then turned into tremendous groundswell of public support that then moved towards actual legislation, are the main reasons that our model succeeds. It's that support from community that's at the core of the successes we have been able to accomplish. And I am really thankful to community for having led the charge. In fact, one of the reasons I decided to come to Sonoma County and serve as the director of ILRO was because of that victory on Measure P back in 2020. It told me that there was substantial support here in Sonoma County. So, you know, not only did it create a system that was well supported, but it also, I think, has really encouraged people like me to come work here. And some of the other staff we have here, I know, choose to come and work here because of Measure P's tremendous success at the polls. There are a few, Measure P has many features. I want to highlight a couple that I think are especially important. One is a guaranteed funding model. Jason Wechter was talking about a funding model in San Francisco that's contingent on a certain number of investigators per number of sheriff's deputies, and I think that can be a good model. In our case, we have a designated percentage, not a percentage of money that comes out of the sheriff's budget, but a percentage of the sheriff's budget that's an equivalency for us. So we are guaranteed an amount of money that is the equivalent of 1% of the sheriff's budget. That's pretty modest, honestly, 1%. But on the other hand, it's a huge improvement over our funding pre-2020. So in the first 3 or 4 years of the agency, generally it had 1 or 2 employees. Now we're up to 6 and also some part-time employees. And we are looking forward in the next couple of weeks here in our budget process to hopefully, fingers crossed, getting approval from the Board of Supervisors to bring on a 7th permanent staff member. If that happens, we will then have 4 attorneys working here in a staff capacity plus me, so 5 attorneys altogether doing the work of the agency. We also have a subpoena power pursuant to Measure P, and that's backed up by AB 1185, which also provides a subpoena power. And I think we will probably be seeing in the next year here or so how well that allows us to gain access to information. We also have authority under Measure P, not just to double check the work of the sheriff's office, but to directly investigate certain kinds of cases, very limited sets of cases, but those include fatalities, either at the jail or out in the field, like a deputy-involved shooting, and whistleblower cases. So when somebody inside the sheriff's office comes and wants to complain about something they see going on amongst their coworkers or amongst the command staff, they can bring that to us for independent investigation. I appreciate, you know, the slide that you see here that Carl, I believe, put together. Thank you, Carl. So it hits some of our biggest wins, biggest challenges, and lessons learned. And I agree with Carl's analysis that it really is important to have the community really engaged with the work that we do at ILRO and with our Community Advisory Council. I know that's a lot. I know we need to have time for questions. So I'm going to pause there and I look forward to hearing from you what you'd like to know more about. Thank you.
John, actually, that wasn't a lot. That was 10 minutes on the nose. So
that was my goal.
You get the prize. You get the prize. However, I have a ton of questions that just came in for you. So if you can stick around till the end of the webinar, I would love to go over some of these. I really appreciate it. Our next presenter is Marshall Arnwine Jr. And I would like to just say that Marshall is an advocate for the criminal justice program at the ACLU of Northern California, where he leads and organizes efforts to reform police policies for 48 Northern California counties. These efforts include implementing AB 392, police use of force, AB 953, racial and identity profiling, and SB 1421, access to police officers' records relating to police conduct, to name a few. Marshall previously worked for the ACLU of Northern California as a criminal justice legal intern when he was attending law school, and was also a law clerk for the San Francisco Public Defender's Office, the Alameda County Public Defender's Office, and the Santa Clara Public Defender's Office. Marshall received his bachelor's degree in sociology and a minor in legal studies from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and is a graduate of the University of San Francisco School of Law, where he received his Juris Doctorate. In his spare time, Marshall teaches Sunday school and performs community outreach at Shekinah Christian Fellowship in San Francisco. He also enjoys playing basketball, volleyball, reading, writing, and spending time with his wife. Marshall, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Carl, for the kind introduction. So today I will be describing the ACLU's involvement in creating sheriff oversight, but with a special emphasis of having extensive community involvement in the process from the beginning. So I'm first going to start with this slide to give a broad overview of the current status of Sacramento County oversight. So right now it is currently active. It began in 2021. Right now, there is a civilian board of 11 members. The civilian board has subpoena power. And this oversight commission also has an inspector general who also has subpoena power. And that's where we currently are now in Sacramento County for oversight. We could take this slide down now for now, please. We just have the slides off. So what I'm going to discuss now is how did we get to oversight 3 years later? And how is it working? What are some lessons learned? What are the biggest challenges that we face? So the first point I want to discuss is making sure you reach out to community members that have already been doing the work for sheriff oversight. So when this law passed in 2020, one of the first things that I did was to reach out to every community member that I could think of and community organizations that were already doing work to make sure the Sacramento Sheriff Office was being transparent and being accountable to the people that it served. For example, I reached out to community members who were formerly incarcerated to hear their perspectives of how they were treated while they were in jail. I reached out to community members who may have lost loved ones due to sheriff violence. I reached out to grassroots organizations that dedicate their time to criminal justice reform, such as sheriff oversight. That was the foundation of my involvement, is making sure that I touch base with those that are directly impacted by the system of oppression. After that, we convened and became a coalition. After extensive public comment and outreach to the community, there were approximately 8 organizations, including the ACLU, and approximately 6 community members that came together to form a coalition with the united goal of trying to create an oversight body in Sacramento County. So that would be the first point that I want to summarize, is making sure that community involvement is the foundation, the pillar of creating a community oversight commission. But you still also want to cast a wide net to get a variety of perspectives and opinions, even if they are different from yours. So we reached out to Board of Supervisors, we reached out to other elected officials to learn their perspective on if they could support sheriff oversight as well. And as a unit, a coalition of community members, we were able to write a letter to one of the Board of Supervisors and explain to the supervisor what we believe as community members would be a valuable oversight board that will be transparent to the community, that will be easily accessible, and that could be civilian-led. Let's transition to the second point. One of the biggest challenges that we faced was, as we heard today, AB 1185 grants counties the permission to create oversight bodies, but they do not have to. And that was a big challenge that we faced. There was a lot of resistance to wanting to create a sheriff oversight body, especially with subpoena power. But that is okay, because when you're advocating for change, when you're advocating to create something new that goes against the status quo of what society already has, you're going to experience resistance, but you have to stay the course. Disruption always precedes success. So stay the course. You will feel resistance, you will have disruption, but if you stay the course and advocate for a strong oversight commission, you will eventually get there. And one way to stay the course is to make sure that you and community members have a deep understanding of what the law says and what the legislative intent. And this is why it's important. When you're creating proposals for oversight, you're going to get a lot of opposition who tries to argue things that are just not factually accurate, nor is it true. One argument that we heard often is that sheriff's offices cannot be reviewed by a civilian oversight body. That is not fully true. It is true that the law specifically grants the Attorney General direct supervision over the sheriff's office. However, it is not true that a civilian sheriff oversight body cannot review policies of the sheriffs or make recommendations in order to allow them to be more successful. And I'm running up against my time, so I'll conclude with my last slide. If you could put the last slide up. So the biggest win in Sacramento County was we were able to unite and be influential in the drafting process and creating a resolution to create the commission with subpoena power. The biggest challenge was the Board of Supervisors were not obligated to create a sheriff oversight board. And one of the lessons learned is to make sure that the resolution that your county tries to pass is fully in alignment with AB 11A5, because the one that was created here in Sacramento County, in my opinion, and a lot of community members' opinion, falls short of the full intent of what the law intended to be. And I would say my last point is to try to advocate for commissioners to have powers and duties that are separate and fully independent of the Office of Inspector General, because both of those bodies can exist without having to work together specifically.
Thank you, Marshall. I can't thank you enough for those are very powerful words, and I really appreciate your, rallying cry to stay the course and to not get discouraged, and community involvement. I think we all know that. We do have a little bit of time. I have one question that I think I would like to get to you. Sheriff's offices have a reputation as being the most prone to resort to violence of those police agencies in each county. Has this view been borne out by the ACLU's experience working on police and corrections accountability?
That's an excellent question. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
So if the question intent is to ask whether the sheriffs commit more violence than like a local city's police department, I can't say that for certain. And I would love to follow up with whoever created the question to make sure I understand the context of that question. But I do know for certain that the sheriff's office has such large power over the jails. They have large power over emergency services. And because of that, they have control over a large amount of people, and transparency and accountability must be there for it to be effective.
Thank you. I don't have the answer either. I did in all of my research come across something the other day that did say that sheriffs commit more murders than city police. But again, I don't have that factually. I would love to research it. And like you said, if we can get back to the person who posed the question, that would be great. So now we have an opportunity to pose questions to all of our panelists. We have about 10 or 15 minutes before we get to the wrap up. So I'm just going to start by reading some of the preloaded questions that we had. And then we will, Let me get to this. And this, I'll put it out there to all the panelists, but what are the alternatives, if any, if the County Board of Supervisors decides not to have any oversight as authorized by AB 1185?
Well, I suppose the technical legal answer is that people in that given county can put together a ballot measure, gather signatures in support of the ballot measure, and submit that to the registrar of voters to place on the ballot. That is, of course, complicated and expensive, so I'm not trying to suggest that's an easy process. But at least AB 1185 allows that. And 5 or 6 years ago, it wasn't even clear that people could do that. So that's something. I don't know that that's necessarily going to help everybody in every county.
Thank you, John. The other question I had, and this is coming from me for all three of you, and John, you talked about, or a lot of the questions that we're getting is, how to create oversight in your county, and also that last question, what if it's ineffective? What if there's, to quote you, a lack of political will? I think I would like to hear, and especially from you, John, what successes have you seen since you've been in charge of Violero? I know you talked about policy. Have you had any impact on sheriff's policies in Sonoma?
Yeah, and I'll speak broadly about changes we've seen throughout the history of Violero. One of the ones that came pretty early was a change in a practice they used to use at the jail that they euphemistically called jail yard counseling, which meant that the deputies who were running the jail had this practice of taking prisoners at the jail that they felt were posing behavioral or attitude problems to the yard of the jail. The yard of the jail is not a yard in the sense that it has any grass or any dirt. It's just a concrete pad that happens to be in a room with an extremely high ceiling that's open to the air. So one can see the sun if it happens to be overhead, but at least get fresh air there. So it's it's a concrete room that's partly open to the outside, and they would lay that person down on the ground there and put some pressure on them, either pushing them into the ground or sometimes perhaps even sitting on them or kneeling on them, and give them a stern talking to about whatever it was the sheriffs didn't like. Well, this caused injuries and was of questionable legality. And so there was a lawsuit about the practice and also an ILRO report that was very critical of the practice, and the sheriff's office stopped doing that shortly after, which I think was good. There are some other changes that we can point to in policy. Last year, the sheriff's office made some significant revisions to their canine use of force policy in response to some audits that ILRO did about the use of force by canines and their handlers at the sheriff's office in the year prior to that. We've also seen changes in how the Internal Affairs Division works and is staffed. We've seen significant improvements in the quality of the work coming out of the Internal Affairs Division. We've seen changes in other issues that came up as the result of cases that we audited. For example, changes in the way that the sheriff's office handles conflicts when those arise, conflicts of interest between people who are assigned to investigate cases and the people they're investigating, changes in the way that deputies are and are not allowed to use their uniforms when off duty, etc. So there are a variety of policy changes we have seen, and I think that those would not have happened if we hadn't had ILRO and our CAC. So I do think that one does see change. I think, as other speakers have mentioned, that change is sometimes incremental, but it wouldn't happen at all if folks like us weren't applying this pressure.
Carl, you're
muted.
muted.
I have several questions regarding the sheriffs running jails. And the bottom line is, people want to know, because the sheriff is oriented towards law enforcement, policing backgrounds, use of force, are they the appropriate managers of jails? Will she be focused on rehabilitation, reentry, and recidivism rather than punishment? Given your extensive background, Jason, do you have any opinion about that?
Or I can point to the example of Michael Hennessy, who did not come from a law enforcement background, who really set the model for rehabilitation programs, for working to provide resources to people in the jails, to help prevent them from returning, to give them the resources they need. And I think that's largely continued to this day. I think it's been copied by other offices. So he served for 30 years. People said he was the most popular politician in San Francisco, and that's not an easy thing to be. People very accurately say politics in San Francisco is like a knife fight in a phone booth. And that's what I've experienced. But yes, I think you do not need a law enforcement background to be a very effective administrator. And in fact, former NACO president Susan Hudson, who's an attorney and an oversight practitioner, is currently the elected sheriff of Orleans Parish in New Orleans, and she is the first African-American woman to hold that position. So she transitioned to that without a law enforcement background, and my understanding is she's doing well.
Thank you, John. My understanding is there's actually legislation to change it back to the way it was prior to Mike Hennessy and the move by the rank and file to prohibit anybody as qualified and successful as him from being a sheriff again. Next question I have is for Marshall, and it's this. Marshall, does oversight lead to firing of officers and change in use of force policies in Sacramento County, or I guess has it?
That's an excellent question. I have not seen that happen. The way the Sacramento County Sheriff Oversight is created, there is no discipline of officers. And like we talked about earlier, because the sheriff's office is elected position, I'm of the belief that oversight is not able to, the oversight commission is not able to fire a officer. But something that can be helpful is recommendations based on what has been exposed in their oversight. So if a commission receives policies and procedures that they see are not lawful, and there's particular officers or deputies that are reoccurring actors on those bad actions, I believe that an oversight commission can make a report and make recommendations based on what they find, but then themselves as a commission, oversight does not lead directly to the firing of an officer because they're a sheriff. But that's my understanding.
Thank you, Marshall. Something tells me that we could probably continue this Q&A conversation for the next several hours. However, we are running out of time. So our last part of the program today is we're going to get summaries, 2-minute summaries from each of the CCSO counties, ones that are representing here today. They were going to bring us up to date, as John did with Sonoma County and as Marshall did with Sacramento, on what's going on in their particular counties, what's working, what's not working. So I would like to introduce Saida Inamdar from Alameda County.
Thank you, Carl. Good evening, everyone. We in Alameda County have essentially taken Marshall's advice to heart and have just been keeping on and working through over multiple years to form an effective oversight body. We are at the stage of having the Board of Supervisors consider 2 particular resolutions. One is more in line with what we want to have, which are these particular components: a civilian board. We'd like a few more members there. Subpoena power, yes. An inspector general, yes. The challenges for us has been that we have really advocated for having independent counsel, and that's been there's been an obstacle to that. And also, I think the other challenge is just to keep up the interest and keep up the force, because it's been postponed for so many years. We had one supervisor who had taken this on, and he passed away. And then we have had multiple other changes. So we are sort of digging in, and I think we're getting closer. We had hoped to have them hear the reading of the first draft today, but they postponed it till all the supervisors could be present. And I think our biggest win is that, based on our lobbying and basically our persistence, we have gotten the second option available. But our biggest lesson, I think, that we've learned is that organizing community support is very important, because right now, even if one of the resolutions passes, that is what includes most of our asks, there's still going to be a real, it's going to be a real path to implementation. But we're hopeful, and we'll just keep on keeping on. Thank you.
Thank you, Saeed. And I like being hopeful. It beats the alternative. Our next presenter, I believe, I'm not sure which county is up next. Marin County. So Marin County is going to bring us up to speed on what's happening there. Beautiful Marin County. And Jeremy, you're on.
Thank you. I'm Jeremy Forgy, former chair of the Marin County Human Rights Commission, which was recently eliminated by the Board of Supervisors. I'm presenting in partnership with the Mill Valley Force for Racial Equity and Empowerment, Showing Up for Racial Justice, Marin Chapter, the Justice League of Marin Multiracial Coalition, and as the co-chair of Marin's 1185 Community Outreach Working Group, the group of community activists who worked with NACOL to develop the oversight proposal, which was ultimately endorsed by the Board of Supervisors in June of 2023. That proposal calls for the creation of a civilian oversight commission with an inspector general with subpoena power and the freedom of independent investigation. The county's drafting ordinance has been tied up for months while the sheriff's union drags its feet in the meet and confer process despite our vocal objections. We're hopeful the ordinance will go before the Board of Supervisors at its June 18th meeting. However, there's been no indication from the county if that will happen. Next slide, please. Our biggest win was the Board of Supervisors' endorsement of the community-driven oversight proposal. We worked for 10 months to develop a robust oversight proposal, often pressing against conditions and constraints imposed by the county. The biggest challenge has been the county's deference to the sheriff and the sheriff's union, which has caused months of needless delay and significantly diluted the working group's proposed plan. The sheriff and their union were both invited to participate in drafting the actual oversight ordinance, while the public was excluded from the process, which took 9 months, and is still stalled in the meet and confer process with what appears to be a tool for the sheriff's union to prevent the implementation of Marin's 1185 ordinance. The resulting draft ordinance ultimately deprives the Oversight Commission of basic and essential information. It prioritizes secrecy rather than transparency and imposes impossible hurdles to an independent investigation. The main lessons we've learned is that the sheriff's office and the DSA, the sheriff's union, will do everything in their power to delay and disrupt the implementation of effective or meaningful oversight. The sheriff's office and their union are organized and well-funded entities that also enjoy a special status and support from the county staff and supervisors. To be effective, organizations have to work together to amplify the collective voice, leveraging the press to keep the community well-informed, organized, and engaged in advancing authentic oversight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. And again, very powerful words. And the recurring theme is stay involved, get involved, know what's going on. And I really appreciate it. And I appreciate what you've done too. Next, we're going to be hearing from Mickey in Monterey County.
As you can see from the slide, Monterey County has no oversight whatsoever. We are working diligently to achieve a different result here. The Board of Supervisors in Monterey County appointed an ad hoc committee comprised of the only 2 members of the Board of Supervisors who have expressly favored oversight of the Sheriff's Office. But it has been a year where there's been no real action. There have been a couple of public meetings the ad hoc committee has organized, but we are still waiting for the ad hoc committee to complete their work and to come up with a recommendation to present to the Board of Supervisors. We've been assured that would be happening in the next few months. But meanwhile, the coalition has formed in Monterey County, consisting of the ACLU, where I sit on the board, and the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, NAACP, the League of Women Voters, the Monterey County Peace and Justice Center, and various other organizations, as many have pointed out, are working hard on this issue. And one of the biggest challenges we have is that the sheriff herself, who is trying to improve the sheriff's office since the previous administration, but she ran in support of sheriff oversight and has now changed and says there is sufficient oversight now. In response to that, one of our biggest challenges, in addition to the delays we've experienced, has been that the sheriff is now not in favoring oversight. But we have learned some lessons too. We have made a Public Records Act request, and that Public Records Act request asks for only two things. One is all of the expenses, all the costs, all the monies that have been paid to settle or in response to judgments for claims against the sheriff's department. And we have found that millions of dollars have been spent during this administration and the past sheriff's administration. And as has been pointed out, we intend to make that a large part of the reason why oversight is needed. The other Public Records Act request was for all of the investigations and all of the oversight that's been exercised by the agencies that the sheriff has indicated provide sufficient oversight. And so far, the response, which is now complete, has been that there aren't any public records that are available except for the grand jury report, which says very little, and also one press release from the DA's office about a police-involved shooting. And from that, we infer that there is no public oversight by these agencies that the public can actually point to and count on for sufficient oversight of the Sheriff's Department. So we have work to do here in Monterey County, but that work is being done, and we're hoping that we now have a majority on the Board of Supervisors who will be in favor of oversight.
Thank you, Mickey. I really appreciate it. And yes, thank you for fighting the good fight, and it will get done in Monterey County, no doubt. Next, we will be hearing from San Mateo County and Nancy Goodvan. Nancy, can you please tell us what's going on in San Mateo County?
Yeah, thanks. And I think everyone has heard that every county in our coalition is in a different state of the process. I live in Redwood City. I'm the executive director of Fix in San Mateo County. We're a nonprofit that was set up by a group of volunteers a couple of years ago to set up oversight. We came together because of two issues. First, the deputies had tased to death a Black young father in the middle of the day, not suspected of a crime. No crime had ever been committed on the sidewalk. In spite of a community outcry, taser policies were little changed, if at all, and the deputies were found to have done nothing wrong. We did pay $4.5 million to his family without admitting wrongdoing. Second, our sheriff at the time was one of the few in the Bay Area that was still turning people over to ICE immigration when they were released from jail. So we worked really hard to build community support, and we got 5 city councils to vote to endorse us on our website, representing 1/3 of the county's residents, as well as dozens of elected officials, and all of our local, federal, and state officials endorse us on our website. And we built a coalition of more than 35 groups. So next slide. The biggest win, after all this work, the supervisors took a historic first step in December 2023 and set up a civilian advisory commission. They are seating these people next week, and they expect to start meeting in July. The biggest challenge, they did not give the new commission any duties, any power, any authority. They're just supposed to meet in public with no particular goal. And the second problem is there's no inspector general. Our Board of Supervisors decided if there's a media outcry about an incident, they will go ahead and find someone to investigate that incident. And as you've heard tonight, that isn't what works. So our lessons learned is a big one. Even with a lot of community pressure and support, the political establishment is really resistant to change. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Last but not least, we'll be hearing from Lee Brokaw of Santa Cruz County. Lee, take it away.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I don't see myself spotlighted, but that really isn't important. Oh, there I am. Oh boy. Kind of throw everything away that you've heard and forget my slides. Our county is in budget deliberations right now, and we were fortunate to get Michael Ganako of OIR Group hired at mid-year last year with a budget of $100,000. This year, they are extending his contract for $100,000 for the entire year, not just half a year. So the inspector general can be totally throttled by finances. The other thing that's really important that has not been mentioned is the reason that sheriff's oversight is so important is AB 481, military equipment used by law enforcement. Our particular sheriff has chosen to ignore his inventory of assault weapons and is not reporting his assault weapons, even though we have protested. I personally was at the Board of Supervisors meeting when he made his first report under AB 481, just totally ignoring his assault weapons, even though he had told me that he had them. The reason you need sheriff's oversight is to make sure all these other laws are being enforced and obeyed. We have a sheriff in Santa Cruz County who refuses to obey the law. AB 481 is codified in 7,000 something, something, something. The sheriffs in general seem to think they are a law unto themselves. When there is any kind of mutual aid involvement in your county, where outside agencies come in to help because of an earthquake or a flood or any kind of damage, and outside agencies come in to help supervise or control people, the sheriff is in charge unilaterally. He is in charge. He is the king. He is the god of the situation. We must have control over sheriffs. They cannot be rogue law enforcement agencies as apparently they prefer to be.
Thank you, Lee. Amen to that. And all the more reason, and the reason we're here tonight is to address this issue and to see how big of a movement we can have to make some changes and to bring oversight to all of our 58 counties, or at least the ones that need it the most. I can't thank everybody enough for being here. I can't encourage you enough. Like I said, the recurring theme tonight has been to get involved, find out anybody else in your county that's dealing with some of the issues of the sheriff's office, and see if you can collaborate with them or recruit them. Stay informed of what your county supervisors are doing. Get on their mailing list, address them. And as Lee just alluded to, know what's going on with your specific sheriff's office, whether it's military vehicles or what their policies are. Again, thank you very much. I want to thank the panelists, Assemblymember McCarty, John Alden, Jason Wechter, and Marshall Arnwine Jr., the League of Women Voters of California, the ACLU of Northern California, county coalitions who co-hosted today's events, all of the attendees, everybody that's here today, I want to thank you. And personally, I want to give heartfelt thanks to Nancy Goodman. I've known Nancy for a little over a year and a half, and Nancy has been nothing but amazing in getting stuff done in San Mateo County with Fixing San Mateo, and also with this webinar and moving this thing forward. My last closing thought is this. In his seminal protest song, Arlo Guthrie said, and can you imagine 50 people a day? I said 50 people a day walking in, singing a bar of Alice's restaurant and walking out. And friends, they may think it's a movement. Friends, I think we have a movement. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight and for taking action. Thank you. And on behalf of the CCSO and everybody else, good night.